Letting go is one of the most misunderstood spiritual and psychological concepts. People often think it means giving up, walking away in defeat, or suppressing their emotions just to keep peace. But in truth, letting go is the exact opposite. It is an act of courage. It is a neurological and energetic reset that changes the very chemistry of who you are. And for her, it became the moment everything began to shift. She had lived for too long in a state of survival, mentally rehearsing old arguments, emotionally reliving betrayals, and energetically looping through patterns that no longer served her. Every time she remembered the betrayal, her body didn't just think about it, it relived it. Her heart rate increased, her muscles tensed, and her brain lit up the same way it did when it first happened. The body doesn't know the difference between a past event and the thought of that event. And so, day after day, she unknowingly trapped herself in the emotional past. It wasn't just a mindset, it was a chemical addiction. The body had become so used to stress, hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, that peace felt unnatural. Calm felt boring. She had gotten used to the high of anxiety, the edge of sadness, and the sharpness of anger. Even when things were good, her nervous system didn't trust it. Something in her waited for the other shoe to drop. This is what happens when the body is conditioned by emotion. But the truth is, emotions are energy in motion. They are meant to move through us, not live inside us. And when she finally decided to let go, she wasn't letting go of the person who hurt her or the event that broke her. She was letting go of the identity she formed through the pain. She was letting go of the biochemical loop that her body had rehearsed for years. She realized that holding on was no longer protecting her. It was poisoning her. Letting go is not passive. It is an active decision to no longer allow the past to define your biology. When she sat with herself in silence, breathing deeply, tuning into her body, she began to recognize where she stored the grief. In her chest, in her shoulders, in her gut. She stopped running from it. She stopped distracting herself with noise, validation, or business, and instead she met herself fully. Honestly, in those moments, something miraculous began to happen. As she breathed through the discomfort, something began to release, not all at once. Sometimes it came in tears, sometimes in silence, sometimes in overwhelming waves of emotion. But each time her nervous system recalibrated. Her body began to trust that it was safe again. She was no longer reliving the same moment in time. She was witnessing it, honoring it, and releasing it. Her brain started to rewire. Old circuits tied to fear and survival began to fade. New pathways, once linked to presence, peace, and vision, began to form. The energy that had once been locked up in emotional pain now became available for something new: creativity, joy, possibility. This wasn't forgiveness for anyone else's sake. This was a cellular decision to stop allowing the past to take up space in her future. She realized she didn't need closure from anyone else. She needed clarity within herself. And the moment she gave herself that clarity, the shift was undeniable. Her energy felt different. People noticed it before she did. There was a softness to her presence and a strength in her gaze. It wasn't that she didn't remember the pain. It's that the pain no longer had authority over her. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without relapsing. It means witnessing the story without becoming the story. And that is what she did again and again, until one day her nervous system no longer responded to the old triggers. The body was no longer in survival mode. She had interrupted the pattern. There came a moment when she looked in the mirror and no longer recognized who she had become. Not because of a physical change, but because the woman staring back at her was wearing layers of beliefs, fears, and patterns that didn't belong to her. She had spent years becoming who others needed her to be: the helper, the fixer, the one who held it all together. Somewhere along the way, her true self got buried beneath expectations and past versions of herself. But when she chose to let go, she realized that releasing the past wasn't enough. She had to rewire the identity that had been built around it. Every thought we think, every emotion we feel, and every action we take sculpts the architecture of the brain. Repeated patterns of thinking reinforce specific neural pathways until they become automatic. For her, the identity she had worn for so long, not good enough, too emotional, her to love, was not just a belief, it was a neural network, a chemical signature, a habit of being. And the only way to transform that identity was to interrupt the thought, emotion, action cycle that sustained it. She began by asking a question she had never asked before: who am I without my pain? That question unraveled something deep, because when we build our identity around survival, around abandonment, rejection, betrayal, it becomes hard to imagine a self that isn't in constant defense. But she sat with the discomfort of not knowing. She allowed herself to explore a self beyond the stories she had repeated. She gave herself permission to imagine again. At first, it was unfamiliar. The mind is always looking for evidence to prove its beliefs, and hers had collected years of evidence to support why she couldn't trust, why she shouldn't hope, why she had to stay small. But in this season, she stopped looking for more proof of the old narrative. She began feeding new thoughts into the mind. I am worthy now. I am safe to be seen. I am allowed to take up space. These weren't just affirmations, they were seeds. And every day she chose to think them, feel them, and act from them. She watered those seeds until new beliefs began to take root. Rewiring identity is not an intellectual exercise. It is a full body experience. She had to embody the new self before her reality reflected it. That meant walking differently, speaking differently, even dressing differently. She showed up as if she already was the woman she envisioned. The brain doesn't know the difference between what's vividly imagined and what's physically real. So she visualized her future self in detail, how she would think, how she would respond, how she would feel, and began to rehearse that version daily. Neuroscience tells us that where attention goes, energy flows. And so she withdrew her attention from the memories that kept her small and redirected it toward the future she was designing. This wasn't toxic positivity. It wasn't bypassing the hard stuff. She honored every wound, but she no longer allowed those wounds to dictate who she was becoming. She started waking up with intention. Instead of checking her phone and reactivating the past, she grounded herself. She meditated. She journaled from the perspective of her elevated self. She no longer let the old identity drive the day. The rewiring process wasn't linear. Some days, the old identity pulled her back with full force. But instead of falling into shame or self-doubt, she observed it. She reminded herself, this is not who I am. This is who I was conditioned to be. And in that moment of awareness, she reclaimed power. She disrupted the program. Each time she caught herself slipping into old thought loops, she paused, took a breath, and consciously chose again. There was a noticeable shift, not just internally, but externally. People who had once fed off her insecurity could no longer reach her. Relationships that depended on her staying small began to fall away. And while that pruning was painful, it was necessary, because the new identity she was anchoring in required new standards. It required alignment. And that alignment meant only allowing into her life what honored her self-worth. The more she lived in that elevated state, the more natural it became. What once felt like effort turned into ease. Her nervous system, once wired for hypervigilance, began to rest. Her mind, once cluttered with self-doubt, began to quiet. She wasn't pretending to be someone new. She was remembering who she was before the world told her who to be. She was no longer a reflection of her past. She was the embodiment of her possibility. She used to wake up in a state of silent chaos. Before her feet even touched the ground, her mind was already spinning, replaying yesterday's conversations, anticipating today's problems, and bracing for things that hadn't even happened yet. Her body was in a reactive loop, locked into a predictable cycle. Think the same thoughts, feel the same emotions, take the same actions. And every day she recreated the same version of herself. But the moment she decided to let go of who she thought she had to be, something profound happened. She stopped reacting to life, and she began to create it. Reaction is the default mode of the subconscious mind. It's fast, automatic, and familiar. It's how the body keeps us safe based on our past. For her, reactions were survival strategies she didn't even realize she had learned. When someone pulled away, she panicked. When she was ignored, she over-explained. When she was praised, she questioned it. Every interaction triggered a script that had been running for years. The problem wasn't the people around her. It was the unexamined programming inside her. But as she started to become more conscious, she realized something powerful. The external world was not the source of her stress. It was her internal response to it. Her nervous system had been so conditioned by past wounds that she was constantly scanning for danger. Not just physical danger, but emotional, rejection, abandonment, failure. And because she was always expecting something to go wrong, her body lived in a perpetual state of defense. She began the practice of observation. When the old feelings surfaced, anxiety, resentment, jealousy, she didn't suppress them. She witnessed them. She asked, where did this begin? Whose voice is this really? Is this feeling based on what's actually happening or on what I've trained myself to expect? And with every answer, she loosened the grip of her reactive mind. To shift from reaction to creation, she had to take her power back from the environment. She could no longer allow a text message, a facial expression, or someone else's energy to dictate her emotional state. That meant building a sanctuary within, a space where her inner world became the command center of her life. She started every morning with intention. She didn't wait for the world to give her permission to feel good. She generated the feeling first. She sat in silence, tuned into her breath, and reminded her body what peace felt like. The body only knows what it's repeatedly exposed to. So she fed it new emotions, gratitude, love, worthiness. Even if at first they felt unfamiliar, she knew that repetition creates reality. That if she practiced elevated states long enough, the body would begin to trust them as truth. And slowly her baseline changed. What once triggered her now became an opportunity for expansion. Instead of reacting, she chose how to respond. She moved from unconscious programming to conscious design. Creation requires clarity. And so she began to ask herself every day, what do I want to feel? Who do I want to be? What energy do I want to bring into this space? These questions became her compass. And instead of waiting for the outside world to align, she aligned herself internally first. Her life stopped being a reaction to circumstances and became a reflection of her consciousness. People around her felt the shift. She no longer played into drama or tension. She didn't need to prove anything, chase anyone, or defend her worth. She became calm in situations that once shook her. Not because life had become easier, but because she had become stronger. Her energy was grounded. Her presence was intentional. And with that, she began to attract situations that matched her internal state. There's a profound truth in the way the universe works. It doesn't give us what we want, it reflects what we are. So she focused on being the energy of what she desired. She became love instead of longing for it. She embodied peace instead of begging for closure. She chose joy in the midst of uncertainty. And as her energy changed, so did the opportunities that found her. The shift from reaction to creation is a sacred one. It's not about controlling everything. It's about choosing your state regardless of the circumstances. She realized that she was no longer at the mercy of the world. She had become the architect of her experience, the author of her reality, the creator of her own becoming. It didn't start with a new wardrobe, a gym membership, or a fresh hairstyle. Her glow up didn't come from an external transformation. It began the moment she changed the relationship she had with herself. She didn't wait for validation. She didn't seek permission, and she didn't aim to impress. Instead, she went inward. She turned her attention to the subtle, invisible realm of energy, the space where true transformation takes place. Because when you shift your internal state, your entire external reality begins to follow. For so long, she had been conditioned to believe that beauty was something she had to chase. That radiance was found in the mirror, not in the mind. But over time, the temporary high of external approval lost its power. Compliments felt hollow. Achievements felt like checkboxes. And no matter how much she tried to fix or perfect the outside, she kept bumping into the same invisible wall. Her self-worth had never truly taken root. It was dependent, fragile, conditional. So she made a radical decision. She would no longer treat herself like a project to be fixed. She would treat herself like a temple to be honored. And that required her to go deeper than the surface. She stopped asking, "How do I look?" and started asking, "How do I feel in my body?" She stopped performing and started embodying. She stopped seeking approval and started giving herself the love she had so long been waiting to receive. The body responds to the energy of thought and emotion. Every time she felt shame, her shoulders curled inward. Every time she dimmed her voice, her throat tightened. Every time she ignored her intuition, her gut clenched. These weren't random sensations. They were signals. Her body had been speaking all along, and now she finally began to listen. As she tuned into her internal state, she became aware of just how much energy had been trapped. Energy tied to comparison, guilt, unspoken resentment. She started releasing what no longer belonged. Through meditation, through breath work, through honest stillness, she cleared the noise, and in that clearing, something new began to emerge. A quiet confidence, a warmth that radiated not because she tried to glow, but because she stopped hiding. She noticed how her face softened when she felt peace, how her eyes lit up when she spoke about what mattered, how her skin responded differently when she wasn't living in a state of constant stress. The nervous system plays a direct role in how we appear. Chronic stress constricts blood flow, impacts hormones, dulls the skin, and tightens the muscles. But when she shifted into a state of coherence, when her heart, breath, and mind aligned, her body responded with vitality. Her cells recognized the safety of presence and began to heal. She no longer obsessed over the mirror. She became more interested in her magnetism. Energy doesn't lie. It can't be faked. And hers had changed. People sensed it. They couldn't quite explain it, but they felt it. A calm strength, a grounded glow, an undeniable presence. That's because she was no longer leaking energy trying to be liked. She was conserving it, redirecting it, using it to create a life that felt aligned. Her glow up was quiet. It wasn't loud or showy. It was subtle yet seismic. It was in the way she walked into a room without shrinking. It was in the way she held her boundaries without apology. It was in the way she spoke with conviction, even when her voice trembled. Her glow up was spiritual. It was energetic. It was cellular. The people who once overlooked her now stared in awe, not because she changed for them, but because she stopped needing them to see her. She saw herself fully, lovingly, without comparison, without shame. And that kind of self-recognition created a light that couldn't be dimmed. True beauty is coherence. When your inner world reflects clarity, love, peace, and purpose, your outer world follows suit. She began choosing foods that nourished her, not punished her. She moved her body not to punish it, but to honor it. She rested, she danced, she played, because joy was no longer something to earn. It was something she allowed. What changed wasn't just her energy, but the way she held herself. She walked taller. Not because she was trying to impress, but because she no longer carried the weight of shame. Her voice had depth, not because she rehearsed it, but because she finally spoke her truth. Her presence was magnetic because it wasn't about attraction. It was about alignment. There was a shift so profound it could not be seen. It could only be felt. It happened the moment she stopped chasing outcomes and began living in alignment with the woman she knew she was becoming. She no longer waited for the relationship, the recognition, the money, or the perfect timing to feel the way she wanted to feel. Instead, she became it now. She closed the gap between who she had been and who she was becoming, not through force, but through alignment. Her past had taught her to prepare for disappointment. to anticipate loss, to water herself down so others wouldn't feel threatened. And so she lived reactively, building her self-concept around what had already happened instead of who she was capable of being. But something inside her knew that in order to step into her future self, she had to become emotionally and energetically unavailable to the past. She had to stop revisiting pain for comfort, stop rehearsing old versions of herself out of loyalty, stop retelling the story that kept her bound to an identity she had outgrown. Living in alignment didn't mean becoming someone new. It meant finally allowing herself to be who she truly was, the woman she saw in her visions, the one who spoke with clarity, moved with grace, loved without fear, and led without apology. That woman already existed. She didn't need to be created. She only needed to be remembered, activated, and embodied. And embodiment requires discipline. Not the kind that's rigid or harsh, but the kind that is rooted in deep reverence for self. She realized that she couldn't build a new life with the emotional habits of her old one. If her future self was calm, she had to practice calm now. If her future self was confident, she had to speak from confidence now. If her future self was abundant, she had to stop acting from scarcity now. The brain doesn't wait for results to change. It changes when the internal environment changes. So, she became intentional with everything. What she consumed, what she entertained, how she spent her time. She didn't just visualize success or love or peace. She began embodying the feeling of it until her nervous system recognized it as familiar. Her mornings became sacred. Her thoughts became curated. Her environment became supportive. She stopped surrounding herself with people who reinforced the old narrative and started building a life that matched the frequency of the future she was calling in. And that future wasn't something she had to reach for. It began showing up in the present. Because alignment is magnetic. When your thoughts, feelings, and actions are congruent with your vision, life bends to meet you. She wasn't faking it until she made it. She was feeling it until she became it. She was collapsing time by acting in the now as if the future was already here. She found that alignment wasn't a single choice. It was 1,000 micro decisions made every day. It was saying no when her old self would have said yes out of fear. It was speaking up when silence used to feel safer. It was choosing presence when distraction was easier. It was setting boundaries, not to punish others, but to protect the frequency she was now living in. Her future self became the standard, the blueprint, the compass. And each time she veered off course, she didn't spiral into shame. She simply noticed, recalibrated, and returned to her center. She treated alignment not as perfection, but as devotion. A daily devotion to staying connected to the highest version of herself, even when the evidence hadn't arrived yet. People began asking what changed, why her energy felt different, why she seemed lighter, stronger, more radiant. And the truth was, it wasn't one big breakthrough. It was the quiet, consistent choice to no longer betray herself for belonging, to no longer wait to feel worthy, to no longer see the future as a destination, but as a frequency to live by. This version of her didn't need external proof. She didn't chase, beg, or hustle to be seen. She saw herself. She trusted herself. And from that deep trust, her energy shifted. Doors opened. Alignments happened, not because she forced them, but because she finally stepped into the energetic field where they already existed. Living in alignment with her future self meant becoming emotionally fluent. She no longer avoided discomfort. She processed it. She no longer feared solitude. She cherished it. She no longer resisted change. She welcomed it as part of the initiation into her next chapter. Because the woman she was becoming required depth, not just ambition, integrity, not just image, and that required her to become the embodiment of what she had once only envisioned. She let go. And in that letting go, she didn't lose herself. She found herself. Not the self that was shaped by expectations, wounds, or roles she was taught to play, but the self that had always been buried beneath the noise. Her transformation wasn't loud. It wasn't something the world gave her permission to do. It was a silent decision made in solitude, sustained by inner work and powered by something deeper than willpower: awareness. She stopped living in survival mode and started living with sacred intention. She stopped reacting to life and began designing it. And as she released what was no longer aligned, old stories, emotional patterns, and fractured identities, she made space for something real to emerge: presence, wholeness, and personal power. Her glow up wasn't an aesthetic trend. It was a vibrational shift, a return to coherence, a reminder that true beauty, true power, and true love are not found outside of you. They radiate from within you when you are no longer at war with yourself. She didn't chase, she aligned. She didn't pretend, she embodied. And through that embodiment, she became the living proof that when a woman lets go of who she's been told to be and dares to remember who she truly is, she doesn't just shine, she glows.